What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's Motorfest video, I do want to go over these slaloms in this game and how to get faster at them. Now, I would say it's probably going to be one of the most popular skills in this entire game, and that's most likely going to come down to them always showing up in a summit. So at least being able to basically go as fast as you can, or at least having the right setup for them, is at least going to give you a better chance of having a higher score in them. And of course, on the flip side of that, also getting into platinum. Now, if you are wondering, you can run different classes in these skills if you would like to, but the biggest thing is some are definitely going to be better choices than others. And one of the other arguments is you can basically run any class of your choice if you did want to go after like a high score in a summit. The biggest thing though is basically having a score breaker set active, which I actually have one of these for basically every class in the game. So I do tend to run different classes in the slaloms to see how they can perform and to really see how close these might end up being compared to like an Alpha GP or like a hypercar, which by the way in most places that's probably going to be the fastest option. I will show some of those here in a second, but for the first clip though, I do want to show the motocross class running a score breaker set. I also have my legend points on the skilled perk as well. Now the biggest question is, how many points can you get with a class like this one? So for the first run here on the motocross bike, I'm basically starting off like you normally would when you do spawn to it. I'm also then going to show how people are getting such a high score on these, and most likely the best way to do so, but running a score breaker set on the dirt bikes here, you can tell that these are obviously not going to be as fast, but funnily enough, having a score breaker basically gives you a lot more points on them, so you really do not have to be as quick as some of the other classes, but also get a high score on them. So currently right now on PlayStation, a high score is going to be 20,000 points, which if I had to guess is going to be one of the other classes. Running a motocross bike, I'm only less than 2,000 points behind some of the higher scores. Now for the next vehicle I am going to show is going to be a rally raid based vehicle with a full score breaker set active. What I do find kind of insane is yes, a motocross class can easily get basically a high score on all of these, and you most likely do know from the Crew 2 that basically most of the best vehicles on these was also going to be a rally raid class, and that does come down to like the special score breaker set, but you can easily run something like this vehicle on these as well. Yes, you're not going to be as quick on the road, but at least you can still easily get a very high score on most of the slaloms with them. And one thing is, of course, a good build on these can be fairly decent. As you'll see right there, I was basically around 150 point difference compared to a motocross bike. Now, I'm sure right now a lot of players are most likely going to go, well, Blocked, if I am trying to get like the highest score, why are you showing me something like a motocross bike and also a rally raid vehicle? Those are most likely not going to be the best options. I am trying to get the highest score possible in a summit, or at least trying to get like one of the highest scores in a skill. That way I of course do not have to go back into that one, but even spawning there with a racing vehicle, I got over 19,000 points, which funnily enough is going to be around 1,200 points more than a motocross bike. Now, spawning into an Alpha GP vehicle, if you did start off in the exact same place, it's most likely going to be a fairly similar score to a racing car, and that's probably going to come down to their speeds being fairly similar. Now, if you are wondering though, how are players getting such a high score in these slaloms? I'm sure you most likely noticed some people using a plane, which by the way, I'm definitely not going to do that. Is it a good option? On some of these it probably would be, but one of the best ways to get a high score though is going to come down to a few factors. The first one is how fast you actually start off hitting the said slalom itself, and the second one is also going to come down to a fairly annoying RNG thing. That is going to come down to the cars being in the way, and how close you can actually get to these set objectives that way. Now there is going to be three important factors here if you are looking to be as fast as possible on basically every slalom in the summits. Number one is going to come down to the car that you are picking and obviously how fast it is. Do not worry though, you can also run something like a motocross bike if you want to run something like that. Having a score breaker set is going to be the number one factor there. Number two though is going to be how close you are getting to the objectives themselves. That's also going to allow you to get a higher score because you are quicker, and you can also like maneuver and get around them a tad faster as well. Now unfortunately number three is going to come down to a slight RNG issue in this game, and that's probably going to be the lovely AI here in Motorfest. Like, if we have been doing summits for a minute now, you're most likely going to notice AI everywhere, and I would say on most of the skills in the slaloms, they do seem to pretty much always be in the way. So maybe running like a motorcycle might be a better option depending on the road, like for example the one I'm about to do here. But again though, if you are looking to be fast, definitely spawn backwards. Now you could probably run a plane. I would say most people are not going to do so, especially on console. At least I haven't really seen anyone run a plane. You can, but I would probably say just run like an Alpha GP vehicle or even something like a Demolition Derby car if you want to mix it up. And that way you can actually get a pretty high score regardless of the vehicle you are running. Now, if you are wondering, by the way, what is going to be the score difference of running something like an Alpha GP car compared to like a Rally Raid, or even something like a Tier 1 vehicle that's going to be slightly slower, one thing I did find kind of funny about this is it's actually not going to be that far off from each other. Like, if you are looking in the leaderboards, most of the highest scores are probably going to be maybe 2 to 3,000 points off. That's probably going to be around 154,000 points in that said event. Now, if you were running like a motocross bike and probably got around maybe 14,000 or maybe 14,500, you're most likely going to get maybe 152,000 points on it. I was noticing even running something like a motocross bike compared to an Alpha GP vehicle in a summit, I was still only around 2 to 3,000 points of a difference behind them, which by the way is really not going to make much of a difference at all, especially in a summit. So the top 4 things I would say you are going to want to look for to get the highest score in a slalom. Number 1 is going to be a score breaker set, which I would say that's probably going to be fairly obvious. Number 2 though is going to be the fastest vehicle that you can run on them. For example, like an Alpha GP racing or even a hypercar. Number 3 is then going to come down to how fast you can get around the yellow icons. That way you are going to get a higher score, which is why of course a vehicle that does handle better with a higher speed is most likely going to be the preferred vehicle in them. And then of course the final one is probably going to come down to the RNG of the annoying AI. We all do know, especially in summits, how they basically show up in like the escapes and these slaloms at the worst time possible. And of course I would say that's probably going to be done on purpose, but let me know if you guys have any questions at all regarding how to be faster on these slaloms. I would say a lot of players are definitely going to be practicing on them with how often they show up in summits.